Keener.
Here.
Councilmember Nelson.
Here.
Councilmember Scott Staley.
Present.
Councilmember Watkins.
Here.
Councilmember Wade.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. All work session items are listed for discussion only. No action can or will be taken. The primary purpose of work session meetings is to provide the City Council with the opportunity for in-depth discussion and study of specific subjects. Public comment is not provided for on the agenda and may be made only as approved by consensus of the Council. In appropriate circumstances, a brief presentation may be permitted by a member of the public or another interested party on an agenda item if invited by the mayor or city manager to do so. The mayor may limit or end the time for such presentations. And our first work session agenda item tonight is a pilot program for parklets and pedlets. Good evening, Mr. Kellogg.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of the council. This will be fun tonight. This is a thing that many cities have embarked on, and one of the things that I got to see when we went to Seattle for Main Street was the advent of many cities taking on what they refer to as pedlets and parklets, and as it kind of noted in the slide, is for outdoor dining and relaxation. So what I'm going to do this evening is kind of walk you through the two options, and then at the end, we certainly can have some discussion to look at a pilot, but kind of see a little bit of the pros and cons of, pedlets versus parklets. So with that, a pedlet is a movable structure that acts as a sidewalk extension beyond the existing curb line, and it provides a buffer between traffic and restaurant. The unique part about a pedlet is that it is an extension of that restaurant, okay? So it allows them in these cities to take it to the curb. And as you can see in the picture here, they take it to the curb, and then what they do is extend out into the roadway. You provide a walkway around. Now, the one thing and the challenge always is you're going to lose some parking spaces, okay? But the one thing that we have an advantage of in Kingman is the very wide streets, and so we might even at that point be able to incorporate some parallel parking as opposed to diagonal in that particular area. But here, with a pedlet, is that the restaurant owner controls that property, okay? They coming out, and stuff. Now, where we saw this used a lot was one of the key cities is certainly Milwaukee. They do this, it's done in Montana. But a lot of places where there is, you certainly have the winters, those folks take real advantage of the fact of their seasons. And so when it's not cold, they get that restaurant cooking and they get you outdoors. And so the idea here is that in some of these communities, and again, I tell you what happens to them, is they have a situation where maybe they have to actually lease the parking from the city, or it's paid parking and stuff like that. We don't have that, but we would certainly, lose parking spaces, when you do this. So as you can see here, the restaurant controls it. You are actually guided out into traffic. Now, some of the other photos will give you some little different looks at it. A pedlet. Goals and activities. This project aims to improve walkability and increase business activity in the downtown. Now, as we know, we have some already out into the sidewalk, but those are what you would call minor encroachments. This takes you to the curb and then to the street, so you've really extended that area. Major outcomes, the pedlet is proven to be an economic driver. The participating businesses can add additional seating and increase their staff to accommodate the new businesses that the sidewalk dining has allowed. And more, I think certainly one of the things that we even saw in Seattle is people just love to eat out on the sidewalks. Even at the hotel that we were staying at, they had an area when the weather's right, boom, they're outdoors. So even though the street is crazy busy, which, we have busy streets, but nothing like that. Revenues can increase by 20% after installation because, again, the restaurant controls that area. Now here's just an idea of what it looks like in the raw. Now remember, in utilizing the creativity and placemaking concepts to design and implement the pedlet, what you see happen here is that this is the responsibility of the restaurant owner, okay? The relationship and the partnership with the city is how do you make this happen in relationship to the parking spaces you would use up? But again, as this picture really depicts, you can see how, again, the restaurant controls it, so there is the extension of their liquor license and stuff onto the sidewalk, but pedestrians are safely routed around it. So again, the thing I want to stress about pedlets is that you control that environment. because it's controlled by the restaurant. I guess it really doesn't even have to be a restaurant. It could be something else, the business that wanted to extend out there. Financing options, they consider pursuing grants for funding for placemaking in these communities. Financing could also be private-public partnerships. And in the case of the city, I think, we certainly could use a little bit of the economic development funds and say, okay, how do we partner with somebody? And I think later on I'd like to discuss a little bit about if we venture onto a pilot program, maybe we offer up a couple of pilots and first come, first serve, and we play a role, certainly in permitting and things like that. But find a way to help them and encourage them here. Now we get into another concept called a parklet. A parklet is unique in the fact that it sits beyond the curb, and again, it's not controlled, okay? The business would be over, say, onto what should be to my left, would be where the business would be located, but again, the sidewalk is free, and here, it's public. Now, what we saw in some of these other communities, that the parklets were sometimes challenging as to about you control who's in the parklet. Okay, so that would kind of set it up there. But again, it's another concept. I think if we were to venture down the parklet road, that it would probably, for us right now, maybe more of the responsibility for the parklet would fall with us. In the case of both of these are temporary facilities. They're made with decking, metal late, whatever. Now, in the case of, for example, when we referred back to the pedlets, in those communities, those businesses are responsible for taking up the temporary fencing or whatever that might be, but they're also responsible for that walkway. So in most cases, they're made in sections. They're easy to lift on a forklift, and they have to actually make arrangements to put them away. And this is where you really see it predominantly in snow country. I think one of the challenges for us is to make sure that either one has to work with the water flow on our streets. And until we resolve that downtown problem with, maybe storm drains or whatever, we'd have to make sure that these things didn't create a dam and screw the business up by having the water back up and go into it. So there will be challenges even in looking at the pilots on how we would want to do this. Again, another vision of a parklet. Okay, you can see the businesses over on the right. They are public seating platforms that convert, and I stress that public seating, they convert curbside parking spaces into vibrant community spaces. Again, for some communities, this has worked extremely well. And so, again, you can see here, the store to the rear could be a flower store. It could be an antique store. It could be many of those things. Again, here's another picture of a parklet. Again, you can see the sidewalk on the right, the street to the back. And this, in particular case, it's just open seating as you would have in any public park. And so, again, these have to all be portable, be able to be lifted up, either in sections or whatever, and moved to a storage location. I think in our case, we are certainly blessed with good weather, so it wouldn't be a big problem until probably the biggest thing we would face is a monsoon. It would cause some water flow issues there. Again, here's another picture of a parklet, and you can see that this one has tables and stuff in it and benches, but again, it's separated from the business, so the controls aren't there the same as they are with a pedlet. Well, before I go on to that, so both have certainly unique qualities. I found I drove the street again today to look at the curbs and say, okay, if we adventure on this, or we say, okay, we're going to do a couple of pilots, I took a look at the curbing at really those locations, our two breweries, our other restaurants, and fortunately, those curbs are okay. So we're not stepping up like we are down on Central Commercial there with a curb that high or whatever. So you can come out from that curb and provide it. Now, the one thing that you always have to keep in mind is it has to be ADA accessible. So whatever we do in the case of a parklet or a pedlet to route around her, it's got to be wheelchair accessible so that it can flow very easily. So these are made from all kinds of things, plywood, redwood, depending on the community. But now many of them that we saw were made of this new decking material, so it's very weather resistant and things like that. So So those are really some of the I guess, the real highlights of it. For me personally, I lean towards the Pedlet because I really like the extension of the restaurant business and stuff like that. And so it would take, for an example, like down at Rickety Cricket, instead of having this much space now, that you can take advantage of the full sidewalk, and still provide, the pedestrian right of way to go out into the street area. So that's really kind of it in a nutshell. I think the pictures speak more than anything else, but I also provided for you, these were the references that we used from the different communities that looked at it. So again, the community in Milwaukee, they've done all the legwork. So if we start this, they have online their permitting process, everything, their specifications, and they have it all laid out. So it's really nice. So in that particular case, we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. So I guess the conversation that I would certainly like to have with council tonight is, if you like the idea, and if, whether that be Parklet or Pedlet, hopefully Pedlet, but not that I want to influence you there, is we can certainly look at the pilot and maybe certainly get this thing rolling, because it would begin to change the face of our downtown community, and I think in a very positive way. So,
Comments? Questions?
Well, thank you for the presentation, Gary. I'd asked for this to be put on to our work session because, as we all know, with the very comprehensive downtown streetscape plan that the city has approved or is going to be going to go forward with, we don't want to lose down any momentum downtown. So I've been in other cities where, you have 4 or 5 of these things on a street. It completely changes the character and the look and the feel of the street. It becomes an actual place where people hang out longer, they spend more money. It would be great to have some of these during First Friday events for more seating to help with the ambiance. I've already spoken to several of the businesses down there that are already interested in the program. Most of the programs that I've seen, they're actually privately funded. It's the private business that's responsible for hiring an architect, designing it, going and getting all the approvals with the city, making sure their design takes into effect both the contour of the street and drainage concerns and ADA. They are portable, but they're heavy enough where they're not going to float away like an ark. And so I just think it's a really great thing, and it should really be up to the businesses. I'd like to see some sort of a policy brought back on the business agenda, maybe in like 45 days, that offers the business owner to choose one or the other. I mean, why would we just limit it to either parklets or pedlets under a pilot program? Let's offer both under a pilot program, and let's see which one of those the restaurants or the businesses choose and how they work out. I think that's kind of part of a parklet pilot, is to sort of test something out for a
we certainly can take those guidelines from Milwaukee and other places like that, and the community in Montana that embarked on this.
I think it's a win-win for everybody. Win for the business. If business can go up 15 to 20%, yes, you lose a couple of parking spaces, but it takes that one parking space where someone, maybe 1 or 2 people use for an hour, and from what I've seen, 10 people use that same space in a parklet or a pedlet for an hour. So most downtowns I've been to, you're really lucky to get a spot right in front of the business you want to go to. Chances are you might have to walk a block or 2. So, and we just spent a bunch of money on ADA sidewalks. So,
yeah, well, I think the good thing is that we have plenty of parking no matter what. You may have to walk a little bit further. But, parking is. Yeah. I wish if we have a parking problem, wouldn't that be great? That means it's.
I'm excited about it. And Jamie actually mentioned a point about maybe partnering with on construction, or the businesses could. With the prison?
I have that on my notes.
Oh, sorry.
Can we let Counselor go first? Yeah.
I agree with Vice Mayor Lingenfelter. I did want to ask a question for clarification, because it looks like probably an aluminum deck, but this picture here, I think it's the second one you had in your presentation.
Yes.
Is that an aluminum? Did you guys look at that? Is that aluminum, or do you think that's concrete? It looks aluminum, right? That deck surface?
I think it has to be temporary in nature.
It does.
Yeah, it's got to be able to be out. It's
But
sitting,
it has to
sitting on
be-
a platform, so they all have to be able to be moved. So I think Councilman, that's the really good part, is that because, as we progress down the road and we develop this master plan for Beale and everything, is that you know, we're not stuck with anything here. These are temporary, you know, and as we design the new one, you know, we certainly, if they become the success I think they can be, then, you know, they can be incorporated. But in the meantime, you know, the flexibility is that you can take it up and you can move it. You can do a lot of things.
I like the idea of a pedlet because, as mentioned already, and as you mentioned too, it puts a little more responsibility on the business that wants to expand their clientele. And, you know, in these budget times, you know, that way it takes the impact of less off the city. Because if we put a parklet in, of course, we're going to have to maintain the parklet, which can be done using affordable labor, but that isn't always, you know, available. So we have to be cognizant of that too. So, but I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Scott Staley, quickly, we have 2 more agenda items.
Yes, okay, so my 2 cents on this, you know, I'm excited about adding these to downtown. They're very successful in other places. I would like to see us try both, just because we really need to see what works better, what has more appeal to the residents. But I think, to be fair to someone like Diana's, Cellar Door, or Floyd's, where they have such a lip in the curve and they couldn't do the pedlet, they could still do the parklet and take advantage of this program. I do think that we need to consider limiting the amount we will allow to go in per block, just because there needs to be some rhyme or reason. And what sizes, will we let them take up 5 parking spots for a parklet or 2, those kind of things.
Think about those 2 restaurants, I mean, her place and the right next door, Dave's, and then, you know,
Right.
that's a lot of parking spaces.
That is a lot of
If we chewed it
parking
all up at
spaces.
one time.
But if they could do, and that's the other thing, those 2 could come together and do a giant pedlet. But they have that lip. But instead, maybe they could agree on doing a 2-space parklet right in the middle, and then their customers could share that space for seating. And I think they both work together really well and would probably be up for that. But that doesn't, you know, it doesn't put them out of consideration since they have that lip. We'd be looking at both. And then the last thing, I know we're in a hurry. The Main Street group just had the prison build and donate 10 of those tiny mobile community libraries, movable libraries, to put downtown. They were great about it. They built it very quickly. We just sent them the specs, and they said, how many do you want? And here you go, come pick them up. And so I'm wondering if we couldn't partner with them. We'd just have to give them a design and see if they wouldn't build it, and then we'll have to go pick it up and install it. But it might be a nice way to get one out right away and just see how it goes. And then we'd also want the businesses to participate in some kind of a weekly survey to see what the good, the bad were. Are they seeing an increase in sales, that kind of thing. I'd be interested in hard data to find out how they're impacted and whether it's worth city investment going forward or not. That is all. Thank you.
I think from a construction standpoint, you know, almost each one of these would be somewhat custom, period. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
depending on the curb and, you know, the crowning of the road and things like that we'd have to, but certainly worth the conversation, yes.
Right.
Just one more comment. Whatever policy you guys bring back, I think that the emphasis should be put on the private business owner. They should be the one that's responsible for really all the costs, installing it, and then there should be a maintenance agreement that goes with it where they spray underneath it, keep it clean every week. I don't think that it would be best to have the city out in front and running the program. I think that really the emphasis needs to be, you put the policy out, and then you give it to the private business community, and then you let them be responsible for
I think for us to make it as easy for them as we can
Yeah.
through the permitting process.
Right.
But you're right. One thing that Milwaukee did is they spelled all that out, you
Yeah.
know, so it's nice to have somebody like that try and do the front running on it
Yeah.
for us.
And it allows for a little bit of innovation and variation in design as
Yeah,
well.
they don't have to be cookie cutter, so,
Right.
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to move forward because we have 2 more items to cover today. But thank you for that presentation. Thank all of you who have worked very hard to get this moving forward. I think we're getting close. The next item of business tonight will be a look at the permanent base adjustment. Director Tina Moline, thank you for being here. We appreciate your efforts to inform us on this.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So tonight's work session item is the permanent base adjustment. Sid and I are actually going to tag team this item, and we're really going to encompass more than just permanent base adjustment. We're going to talk about the expenditure limitation, the alternative that we're utilizing and operating under today, and then also the permanent base adjustment, and ultimately a recommendation at the end of the presentation. So the state's expenditure limitation, what is it? Well, we just talked about this, goodness, just barely 8 months ago. But since 1980, the state of Arizona has imposed a spending limit on local governments. Now, the expenditure limitation is equal to a local government's 1980 budget, and then year over year, it's increased by population and inflation factors, city population and inflation factors. What it does not take into consideration are any additional services or programs that a city has taken on since 1980, or the costs of maintaining infrastructure. And I don't mean just O&M, I'm talking big replacement and renewal costs of maintaining infrastructure. So what are some of those alternatives? So first of all, the state, understanding that cities have increased their services and the cost of maintaining infrastructure has increased, they have allowed voters to approve of alternatives for cities. So what are those alternatives? Well, there are actually 4, but really only 2 that are used on a recurring, ongoing basis, and that is the permanent base adjustment and the home rule option. And under the home rule option, there are actually 2 different types of alternatives. There's the home rule with exclusions and the pure home rule option. 79 of the 91 Arizona cities and towns operate under one of these alternatives, and the city of Kingman is one of those, and we operate under the home rule with exclusions. So by 1988, Kingman had outgrown the state-imposed limit, and so the home rule with exclusions option was adopted and approved by the voters and has continued to be approved by the voters since then. Our home rule option excludes water, wastewater, sanitation, and now airport expenditures, and that's because those particular services that we provide are offered to not only city residents, but non-city residents, and each of those services are paid for by the users of the systems. So Sid's going to give a little bit of history on the election rates, approval rates.
So these are the approval rates from the initial renewal of the home rule option in 1992 to last year's. As you can see from the initial, we had kind of a little bit of a slow start, but not an uncommon number for any of our election questions, starting out at 64%. It peaked in the early 2000s during the economic boom at 86 and 84%, and has dropped off pretty significantly since then, only passing with a 55% approval last election in 2018. These are numbers that we're noticing a trend statewide, but these were definitely very much too close for comfort for the staff. And we have seen several home rule options around the state failing by large numbers like this, and the city's having to scramble at the last minute.
So let's compare the 3 alternatives, which is the permanent base adjustment, home rule with exclusion, and the pure home rule option. So first of all, is voter approval required? Absolutely. Every single one of them requires voter approval, but the difference is how frequent voter approval is required. With permanent base adjustment, it is only required to go to the voters on the initial adjustment to the base. And then if there is a change down the road, then a change to the base that needs to take place, then at that time it has to go back to the voters, but only that time. Whereas either of the home rule options requires voter approval every 4 years, regardless. So does the state imposed limitation apply? Yes, for permanent base adjustment, it still does apply. And for our home rule with exclusions, it does. However, with pure home rule option, it does not. Basically, if whatever a city budgets is what a city's allowed to spend. So the state also allows for constitutional exclusions. Are those applicable in all 3 of these alternatives?
No, they are not. So under permanent base, you can utilize those. Under home rule with exclusions, absolutely. And it is not applicable in the pure home rule option because you can spend what you budget. There's no need for exclusions. Is the adjustment to the 1980 base limit, that 1980 budget, is there any sort of flexibility to that? Yes. That's what permanent base adjustment means. It means that we can adjust. We are asking the voters if we can adjust that base limit. Home rule with either of the home rules? No, not at all. You cannot adjust it. So like I said, there are 79 cities who operate under these alternatives. 30 of them operate under permanent base adjustment, 2 home rule with exclusions, we are one of those, and 47 operate under pure home rule. So of course I'm going to bring the numbers to the table, but I only have one slide on those, but I do want to share what our fiscal year 20 adopted budget would look like if we fell under the different options. I also want to share what it would look like if our home rule with exclusions was not approved by the voters in November, which means we would revert back to the state-imposed limitation until we could take something to the voters the next election. So when we look at the state-imposed limitation, our fiscal year 20 budget is $214 million. We know that we have exclusions of $124 million. At the bottom, there's this difference number, and that is the number that we would that we would actually exceed the state-imposed limitation. And what that means is that we would have to cut $42.2 million from our budget, meaning that we wouldn't really get to adopt a $214 million budget. It would have to be $42 million below that. And that would not be just capital projects. There is no question that the operations would be impacted if any of the alternatives were not approved by our voters. So let's skip to the fourth column, the pure home rule option. Easy calculation, easy to understand anyhow. What you budget is what you get to spend. Home rule with exclusions is ours, and we've been over that one. We know that we did not meet the state-imposed limitation. We have a little bit of flexibility. So looking at the permanent base adjustment, and at the bottom rectangle figure, there are these 1980 base limits. And as I said, under the permanent base adjustment, we can adjust that base limit. Now, I threw a number in there and I played with a lot of different numbers to get to this calculation that looks good on the table. But on a permanent base adjustment, that number, there is no limitation to it. And when we decide what number we would want to use, we definitely want to take into consideration some forecasting, definitely some projections on what we think it might look like in 5-10 years so that we don't have to continue to go to the voters to adjust that. But that number is a number I just threw in there, and you'll see that, of course, depending on what that number is going to make a difference on what our variance or what the state-imposed limitation would be. So just a 3-year history on how close we have come to that state-imposed limitation. In 18, we were, just under $900,000 below it. 19, even less than that. And 20, we know we're $800,000 below it. So with home rule exclusions, each year we are very close to that state-imposed limitation figure. So the considerations that we want to take in selecting an alternative, there are 2 real major ones, and of course, voter approval is one of those, and the state-imposed limitation itself. Do we want to be subject to it? And on the surface, of course, we don't want to have to be subject to that. But the only option that allows us to not be subject to that is the pure home rule. And with pure home rule, it's got to go to the voters every 4 years. And so then that takes us to voter approval and looking at our approval ratings and how they are narrowing as the years have gone on. And so why do we need to take that into consideration? Well, first of all, the state-imposed limitation is complex. It is not easy to explain to the voters. And there are a lot of calculations, figures, what are the differences between the alternatives, so not an easy topic to explain. The frequency of the voter approval. We don't want to have to go out every few years and ask for approval for us to spend what we're already collecting. And then, of course, looking at our approval rating history. So those are definitely the considerations that we want to take, that we want to look at when we're selecting an alternative.
Okay, so looking ahead to timelines for the council to send an alternative to the voters, we would be looking at sending this in the fall of 2020 because our current home rule option does not expire until 2022. So this allows the council that little bit of breathing room. This isn't a do or die vote for us. So staff would be recommending going forward with the primary election at this particular point, but we'd be researching and reaching out to different communities that have taken their questions both at the primary and general elections and why they chose that one. One reason for the primary election at this point is because this will be a presidential election. It's a much higher voter turnout, and our question will be buried on the ballot. Right now they're forecasting a 2-page ballot. That's front and back 1 page and then a second page on the ballot. And that is a large reason why so many communities around the state have seen their questions fail, is because they're buried on the ballot. So either they're not getting the votes, or by the time people get to that portion of the ballot, they simply say no to everything. So right now we'd be looking at bringing a resolution back to the council in March of 2020 for everything to meet the timelines that we would need to pass. If staff finds reason to recommend the general election instead, or if that's council's preference, then we would look at bringing that resolution in June of 2020, and the election timelines would fall after that. Permanent base does have to be referred to the voters by a 2/3 majority of the council, so this has to be a supermajority vote, not a simple majority.
So then what are the next steps? Well, staff is recommending to move forward with the permanent base adjustment expenditure limitation alternative, and primarily for voter, because of voter approval ratings. And what we'd like to do is bring back some adjustment calculations, some forecasting, give you something to consider when you're looking at that. And then, as Sid said, we're looking at the August 2020 election, but we are going to be reaching out and hiring, as you recall, a voter outreach consultant, and they may say differently or maybe advise differently. So at this time, we're not sure August or November. We're thinking August, but until we get some more direction from you and from the consultant, we wouldn't want to hold our hands to or hold our feet to the fire. So with that, we'll try to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments, Counselor?
Tina, when you do those projections, I'm really curious to see with the permanent base adjustment, how cities are impacted when they're seeing significant growth in their communities. Maybe numbers similar or slightly higher to what we have experienced in the past during the boom, to see if cities, when they were in that position, weren't having to go to the ballot more, because I know that's one of the reasons why you're leaning this way, is because you wouldn't have to put this up for a vote as often. But I think a lot of people feel that Kingman's position to start seeing quite a bit of growth. And so I wouldn't want to only choose this option for the reason of not having to take it to the ballot and then end up always having to go back and put it before the voters because Kingman's growing so much. So if you could put some of those scenarios together in your projections, I'd really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good presentation as always. I know that a majority, it was in your presentation, are under pure home rule. I think Havasu is pure home rule.
Permanent base adjustment.
Permanent base adjustment? Oh, okay. Is Bullhead pure home rule?
Bullhead, it falls under the state imposed
Oh,
limitation.
okay. Well, for the reason the home rule option just passed in this last year, so we do have a little bit of wiggle room. Wouldn't it be better to go for just a pure home rule option? And then if it doesn't pass for whatever reason, then you can go back in 2 years. I don't really necessarily think it's a bad thing to go back to the voters every 4 years. That's just my opinion.
So I think the issue is when we look at those narrowing gaps, and for pure home rule, it doesn't matter because you get to, again, spend what your budget is, but the voters still have to approve that option.
Mm-hmm.
But with our current option, with the home rule with exclusions, it's that narrowing gap. And if the voters don't approve it, then again, we revert to that state-imposed limitation. I don't think any of us, including the citizens, would want us to revert to those low numbers.
And that reversion occurs immediately until you can go out for an emergency at the next election cycle, which would be the spring. So you'd at least be cutting that budget by that $42 million immediately for 4 to 6 months.
So in those cities that failed, did they, it wasn't a matter of like lack of an education campaign? They all had education campaigns going and they still
They
failed?
all had education campaigns like they had previously. The one that sticks out in my mind the most is the town of Florence. Theirs failed spectacularly about 4 years ago, and they immediately had to call an emergency session of their council and slice their budget, and I believe it was about a 50% cut for them. So that it was, again, they had done everything they had always done. They had done their voter outreach, their council had been out in the community, and their citizens just, for whatever reason, did not approve it.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that you're doing the risk analysis, because seeing that trend line is very telling, and no matter what option we take, it's going to take a lot of education and information. I'm very curious how our survey team, once we have them, will frame this issue in a way that the public can, give us even an opinion on whether they want to see this or would vote for this on the ballot. So I hope that we will see that as a council as we move forward. I do think that there is a high risk given that trend line, and I appreciate very much that you're using everything, all the tools that are in the tool bag to get us where we need to go. Okay, quickly.
For your next presentation, could you also work with Mr. Foggin to come up with a sort of sample budget cut, what that would look like? Because I want, if we're going to start talking about this, I want from the get-go people to understand that if it doesn't pass, $42 million cannot be cut without cutting your policemen and your firemen and the things that are most important to our citizens. So I would like to make sure that the truth is very, very easy to obtain and see that this will hurt all of us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I would add to that to include examples of the actual failures that have happened and the impact that those had on the cities that have really experienced that. It does happen, and we have to make sure it doesn't happen here.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And the last item on our work session tonight is the Airport Advisory Commission report. Mr. Johnston.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and City Council. I'd like to introduce our Airport Chair Commissioner. He's going to read a brief statement, and I believe you all have a 5-page packet that we just got out tonight.
Thank you, Steve. You know Steve, I don't have to introduce him again. Madam Mayor, City Council members, staff, my name's Carl Hayes, Chairman of the Airport Advisory Committee. With me today are most of our members. You stand? You have a couple that are out of town. Thank you. If you've not heard from me or other commissioners before, thank you for taking back the airport, managing it as a city asset. Many of you asked the resident users to help the city manage the airport. Since your appointment to this commission, hundreds of hours have been donated by our members and other users, not just commission members, to making this an outstanding airport. As Mr. Johnson explains in his report provided to you, much has been done, but there is still much to do. 14 months ago, Joe Husband, the interim manager of the airport, started with a meeting with airport users and compiled a 2-page list of tasks to accomplish in the near term. The list has been expanded, but most of the original items have been accomplished. Staff has focused on the tasks that needed immediate attention. Soon we'll be able to focus more on medium and long-term issues. Since our airport is a city front door to most investors when they arrive here, and many new residents, it's important that it looks presentable. Road work, weed abatement, landscaping, and the terminal have been high on the priority list to correct. The first phase is almost complete. 2 out of the 3 vacant trailers have been hauled away that were eyesores, and 1 is sold, should leave soon. The terminal remodel will be nearly finished this week. The cafe interior has been redecorated, and the exterior and landscaping are left to complete. They'll come up in the very near future. Talk about money. Federal Aviation Administration grants funded by aviation user fees, not general tax revenues, supply a major part of the maintenance and improvement expenses. Mr. Johnson has rehabilitated the relationship with the FAA, and we expect to get at least our share of future grants. There is a page on the back of grants that we're eligible for. They, they know kind of what's coming up, but when it's actually available, then you have to apply right away. And then it starts a clock, and they can delay, but we need to respond real quick. So he's really on top of getting that done. The rest of our budget is derived from aircraft storage and land lease fees, along with the industrial park land sales when they occur. Mr. Brantley, who's not here tonight, started with very little information in October, I believe, that was available except tax records, but he sold one parcel and has 3 more being evaluated. There were few records available when the city took over the airport. I guess I don't say any more about that. When the War Assets Administration transferred the airport to the county in 1949, it came to the city in '88. All of the assets were there for a functioning training base, except aircraft. They were not included. There are many stories about one of the B-17s, bombers, being given to the city. It was worth $2,500 at the time, and I have no idea what the real story is. If it had just been parked out there, it would be worth $1 million today, $3 million if it was restored and flying. We'd love to tell you we could get a B-17 to park out there, but I think we're going to be content with models in the terminal. It would be nice to have more there, and we have some people that are talking about raising some real money and building a museum. Whether it happens or not, I don't know, but the airplanes typically are available if the building gets built. The transfer agreement has restrictions. The land must be used for an airport, and unless we can get the restrictions removed. There could be no discrimination of any kind, and all tenants must pay the going rate. In other words, there could be no free rent for special people or governments, other than, of course, the federal government. They can do a little bit more of what they want to do. It was their land to start with. Today, the airport industrial park comprises about 680 acres of the original 4,000. It was previously released by the FAA to be sold for non-aviation use. Now, it has some restrictions there too. No subdivisions, height limitations, certain activities, and so on. As it is, it's the biggest industrial park north of Phoenix. That's, I think, saying something. From the data provided from the ongoing master plan and the FAA, they're working together on this issue, will soon more than triple the land in our industrial park. It's taken, well, I want to say also, the Rattlesnake Wash interchange will provide access, and that was a remarkable coup on the part of the city council, to I-40 and relieve truck traffic on interstate, Route 66, not interstate. An economic study is being done that will define the economic impact of both the airport and the industrial park, and you'll have that this year. It's taken 30 years to get industrial development to where we are. There's no doubt we will do better in the future, and this will provide a much improved job base for the city. Land needed for the airport decades from now will be protected for future airport development. No one knows exactly what this is going to be, but the master planners are charged with coming up with those kinds of answers. And we don't want to give up land that we're going to need down the road for the airport. Leases on the land for non-aviation uses are permitted in some situations. The far corner that nobody's likely to want to do anything with, then we can't do anything relating to the airport, for instance, would be that tight. We'll pursue this. Greenbelt use is possible. There's a lot of land out there that is not being used today. The airport will have a website soon that will be used partially to advertise for aviation businesses. We do not expect a Boeing, but we do expect to have more businesses located here on the aviation side. One task item we need help with from the city to accomplish is to secure navigation easements. These are more commonly called noise easements, but they're a little bit more than that. At this time, the noise standards are confined to just the runways. There's no noise problem under federal standards. But if a subdivision is built a half a mile off the end of the runway and there's a school there, and 30 years from now we have a lot more aviation activity and some air carrier activity, that might be a different situation, and then you have a constant problem with noise complaints, close the airport, that sort of thing. With the land undeveloped today, it's rather easy to obtain the noise easements or navigation easements. And past management refused to do anything about it, although we had people who worked very hard to make that happen. But it needs to be done soon, and we'll put that information together for you. It'll come out of the data from the master plan, and I think we'll have that too also by the end of the year. We look forward to a workshop with the City Council after the summer to discuss the organization chart, communication paths, and levels of decision-making on airport issues. To close, I want to mention one change that's intangible. All of us on the commission, I think I include all of airport staff that are here tonight, would say, have noticed and heard directly a huge change of attitude. Users, tenants, and visitors. The attitude is positive and it's upbeat. We will work as hard as possible to improve on it. Thank you. If
Thank
you'd like
you.
ask any questions of myself or any other commissioners or Mr. Johnson on his, that started with the 2 pages from Joe Husband. It's a little bit bigger now, but he noticed a lot of it's all completed.
Questions or comments for Mr. Hayes? You know, when we conversed a little, I thought you were going to go way over 20 minutes, and now, now we actually have some time. But I would just take this opportunity to thank you and the rest of the commissioners that are here for all the work you're doing. Everything has changed because of the people who are changing it, and that is you and Mr. Johnston at the airport and the whole city team that's working with you. So we really appreciate it. And it's,
I know staff members are busy, but if any of you would like to come out to the airport, see the whole place, I mean, you can drive around it. I'd be happy to do that, and I'm sure some of the other commissioners would too. Just let us know. You can come directly to me or talk to Steve, and I'm available a good bit of the time.
yeah, thank you so much. Truly
Thank you.
appreciate
When you
it.
think about where we were in 16 versus where we are now,
Yes.
it really makes me glad. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that concludes our workshop agenda. So I'm going to adjourn this meeting, and we'll reconvene at 6 p.m. for the regular meeting. My phone is like... Is it 6 o'clock by your time?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the regular meeting of the Kingman Common Council. Could we have roll call, please?
Mayor Miles,
Here?
Vice Mayor Lingenfelter,
Here.
Councilmember Mello Keener. Here. Councilmember Nelson.
Here.
Councilmember Scott Staley.
Present.
Councilmember Watkins.
Here.
Councilmember Waite.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. I would ask everyone to stand. We will have an invocation by Pastor Shaw of Trinity Episcopal Church. And then I would ask Councilor Watkins to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us pray. God of many names, when you came among us, you proclaimed the kingdom of God in villages, towns, and lonely places. Grant that your presence and power may be known throughout this land. Have mercy upon all of us who live and work in rural areas, especially Kingman. And grant that the people of our nation may all give thanks to you for food and drink and all other bodily necessities of life. Respect those who labor to produce them, and honor the land and water from which these good things come. Also send your spirit of wisdom, charity, and justice upon those who hold office in this city, that with steadfast purpose they may faithfully serve in their offices to promote the well-being of all people. Your holiness we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The council may go into executive session for legal counsel in accordance with ARS 38-431-03A3 to discuss any agenda item. The following items may be discussed, considered, and decisions made relating thereto. The first order of business is a call to the public, comments from the public. Those wishing to address the council should fill out request forms in advance. Actions taken as a result of public comments will be limited to directing staff to study the matter or rescheduling the matter for consideration and decision at a later time. Comments from the public will be restricted to items not on the agenda, with the exception of those on the consent agenda. There will be no comments allowed that advertise for a particular person or group. Comments should be limited to no longer than 3 minutes. I think that we have one person that is a call to the public, and that is William McCabe. Would you like to come up, sir?
Good evening, Council. What I want to discuss tonight is the ADA regulation. I've done a lot of research and have found this here. It's designated a responsible employee and adoption of the grievance treatment. It says that designation of a responsible employee, a public entity that employs 50 or more persons shall designate at least one employee to coordinate its effort to comply and carry out its responsibility under this part, including any investigation of any complaints, communication to the alleged its noncompliance with the part alleging any action that would be prohibited by this part. The public entity shall make available to all interested individual the name, office, address, telephone number of any employee or employee designated pursuant to this paragraph. Complaint procedures. A public entity that employs 50 or more persons shall adopt and publish the grievance procedures providing for prompt and equitable resolution of a complaint alleging any action that would be prohibited by this part. What this saying is the cities need to designate somebody that is responsible to look at the complaints and respond to them. This is out of the 2010 ADA regulation, part 2, which has been in effect for many years. But the city needs to look into that. I have notified the Department of Justice that the city does not. Another thing is the city needs to become ADA friendly. ADA is not going away. It's here to stay. And all it does is give us an equal playing field. It gives us our independence that we can get in and out of a place. They're saying there's 55 million people that are on disability in the United States, which is about 18%. So if you take 18% of the population, it's 4,800 people here in Kingman is not getting the access or the attention because the building department is not enforcing or the city's not enforcing the rules. They're here to make an even playing field, and that's what we want.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. We appreciate your comments. I would, Attorney Cooper, I would just ask that, I know we've done a great deal of work on ADA compliance, but would you please take these comments under advisement and...
Yes, ma'am.
All the information is on the website, which is www.ada.gov.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I think we have no one else signed up for the...
That's not I don't need two.
Thank you. And I don't have anyone else signed up for call to the public. Is there anyone else that would like to address the council at this time? Okay, the next order of business is the consent agenda. All matters listed here are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items. If discussion is required, this item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Before I ask the council, I'd like to acknowledge that the special meeting minutes of June 18th and the, Sydney, which one is the other?
Items B, the special meeting minutes of June 18th, and item F, the regular meeting minutes of June 4th.
Minutes of June 4th are removed from this agenda and will be brought back in August. Other than that, do any of the councilors wish to remove an item from the consent agenda to discuss?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to remove item E, please.
Okay, any other items to be removed? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, sans item B, E, and F.
I move that we approve the consent agenda with the exceptions of item B, E, and F.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Motion and seconded. Do all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Ayes have it, motion carries. Okay, item E, authorization to enter into a contract with Dorn Policy Group. Dorn Policy Group has been providing lobbying and governmental relations services to the City of Kingman since January 2018. Staff is requesting to continue a partnership with Dorn Policy Group through June 30th, 2020. The contract amount equates to $66,000 plus out-of-pocket expenses such as travel, accommodations, postage, etc. Staff recommends entering into a contract with Dorn Policy Group to provide lobbying and governmental relations services for the period of July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020. Vice Mayor Lingenfelter.
Thank you, Mayor Miles. The only reason I pulled this, Tina, when we had our last meeting with Andrew McGuire from, which were they from Cushman Wakefield, is that where they're from?
Gus Rosenfeld.
Gus Rosenfeld, excuse me. But we had a discussion about a certain type of fire district that may lend themselves well to rural communities like Kingman. And I just wanted to see if we could specifically add that to their scope for this next year. I think the majority of the people in attendance were in agreement that that would be something that would be worthy of adding to our legislative agenda, so.
Absolutely. I can work on that and make sure that it is included in the scope.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
I'd motion to approve item E.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
We have a motion and second to authorize to enter into a contract with Dorn Policy Group. All in favor, aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carries. The next order of business is 3A, old business, dangerous animal ban. The mayor requested a discussion and resolution regarding the banning of dangerous animals associated with circuses. This resolution focuses on the public safety aspect of these animals, elephants, lions, tigers, and bears. The attached report, while dated, shows many incidents across the world in which these animals escape their handlers and injure, maim, or kill innocent citizens. Staff recommends that council discuss or take action on this item. And while I have people signed up, I would like to make a statement before we go further. First, I want to thank Attorney Cooper for his efforts in crafting a pared-down administrative approach to address what is genuinely a public safety issue. Wild animals in close proximity to people are, by any standard, dangerous. That danger is guised in venues like circuses, where animals that are not domestic, such as performing lions, tigers, bears, and elephants, are subjugated by means of force to act contrary to their wild instincts. But the danger's still there. The instincts can and do win out periodically, and the results have been devastating to people and property. The first and foremost responsibility of the City Council is to protect the health and safety of our citizens. Last March, we proposed an exotic animal ordinance. The county and many citizens said it was overreaching and perhaps conflicted with other laws. The county asked if the city would consider addressing the issue administratively through our permitting process, and we agreed to pursue that route. In turn, they said they would include some generic language in their contract with the fairgrounds that required work with the city. And the county did that. So what we have brought forth is just what was discussed, a very targeted approach that protects citizens and also adds substance to our animal welfare values that were established by resolution of the City of Kingman Council 2 years ago. I had hoped that a simple, straightforward, and not far-reaching the elements of this resolution would prevail. But I now know that is unlikely. The Mojave County Fairgrounds was quite effective in churning public anger with allegations designed to create mistrust of the city and of me in particular as mayor and the actions I'm taking. And the animal welfare activists, many located outside of Kingman, weighed in to expand the agenda and seek additional welfare actions. The extremes expressed are passionate, and we as a council have been inundated with information and emotions from both sides. Just this afternoon, I think we received 15 to 20 emails opposing this. These are often emails that are replicated, and this one included complaints that this was unconstitutional. And while I wish that I could tone down the rhetoric on this issue, public discourse is fundamental to our democratic process. And quite frankly, I appreciate the passion that our community holds for this issue. Personally, I am glad that this discussion is taking place at the federal level, where I understand Arizona legislators are actually sponsoring bills that will address the use of performing animals in traveling shows. But tonight in Kingman, Arizona, I am not going to ask any members of this council to vote on a resolution in which a no vote does not support public safety or the values established by the previous resolution. Those values are above board and worthy of upholding. I'm going to withdraw the resolution that I have proposed. And instead, I have directed and talked with the city manager to take a different administrative approach. Manager Foggin has agreed to look at these types of events with his team to determine the appropriate amount of liability insurance to require of entities that want to enter our city with performing wild animals. That level of insurance, along with other documentation regarding the well-being of the animals and safety of our citizens, will be institutionalized in our special event permitting process. My understanding is that all the rules are already in place for the city manager to take this action. And while it is not as clear and public an outcome as perhaps I and others had hoped for, it is one that will advance the protection of our city and our citizens. And in the end, my hope is it will be clearly supportive of the council's values regarding wild animals performing in traveling shows. So, Attorney Cooper, did you have anything further that you'd like to add on that?
I don't think I think you spoke quite eloquently on your position. I don't think I have anything to add unless there's some specific questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So this issue is withdrawn, and while there were a few people that signed up to speak, there will be no comment since it is not an agenda item. And while I really think this discussion is not going to be held, I know it isn't, but I want to thank Senator Borelli and Representative Cobb, Supervisor Bishop, and those that are here on this issue. I know that everyone is very, very concerned and caring, and it's also very polarized. So I think that this is the best approach, and the city will move forward with this administrative option. Okay, so thank you. We'll move on to new business. Resolution number 5231, approval of a sewer variance for Arroyo Ranches, tract 6020, Engineering 19-0041. Robert England of England Holding Company, LLC, has submitted this request for a sewer variance for the subdivision known as Arroyo Ranches, Tract 6020. The subdivision is located inside the city limits and within the water service boundary in Section 20, Township 21, North, Range 16 West. It is located south of Wallapai Mountain Road and at the end of Canyon Del Vista Drive, accessible via Arroyo Vista Lane. The subdivision will create 13 residential lots ranging in size from at least 0.5 acres to over 7 acres. The Municipal Utility Commission reviewed this request at their June 27, 2019 meeting and recommended by a vote of 5-0 that the variance be granted. Staff recommends approval of resolution number 5231. Good evening, Mr. Henry.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for that introduction. Just as you read, essentially what we have is a request for a variance for a sewer for a new subdivision. Some of you may recall this item from a couple years back. It was presented in October 2017 and denied at that time. And the applicant, Mr. England, who is here in the audience tonight, has reapplied and is again requesting the same variance that he requested back then. The map here essentially shows the property. It's about 26.5 acres. It's located south of Wallapai Mountain Road, south of the Copper Ridge Apartments, and south of the Ridgeview Ranch subdivision. And the proposal is to subdivide this into 13 lots. There's already one lot with a house that's existing that Mr. England built for his daughter several years ago. The subdivision would incorporate that existing house into the new subdivision as one of the new lots of the subdivision. It's currently an unsubdivided parcel. It has water service and a septic tank with a pump that pumps back to existing sewer main in Canyon Del Vista Drive. The topography of the area is a challenge for development. Essentially, as the land gets south of Wallapai Mountain Road there's a ridge that drops off into the canyon. It's not a subdivision that can be served by gravity sewer. The applicant, Mr. England, has at one time asked to have individual septic tanks with septic pumps in them that would pump back to the existing manhole. He's talked about putting in a central lift station that might collect all the sewage from all the lots and then pump that to the existing manhole in Canyon Del Vista. And staff did some research on both of those items. The individual septic tank pumps, or step systems as they call them, septic tank effluent pump. Other communities around the state, we did research and found that other communities such as Prescott, Sholo, that have allowed those types of systems, even though they were proclaimed to be something that the homeowners association for the subdivision would maintain, and that the city would, or the community, county would not ever have to maintain or own or operate those. We did find that some of those communities have reversed their decisions and no longer allow those type of systems. So we did shy against that as a recommendation. And then as far as a centralized lift station, two of the proposed lots could actually connect to sewers. So we're only talking 11 of the 13 that Mr. England is asking for an exception and variance for allowing a septic tank. The problem with 11 lots and a lift station is that the lift station would cycle on and off a lot, and just working with our public works guys on this and their knowledge and experience and problematic issues with lift stations, staff just feels that allowing a central lift station here that the city would own, operate, and maintain would just cost more than the revenues that it might bring in. So staff would support the request. Let me see if there's anything else. I know there's a couple maps here. This is a map showing the proposed 13 lots of the subdivision. And the preceding one here, the yellow areas show some existing subdivisions in that area that have developed. Boulder Creek Estates and Wallapai Foothill Estates, they've all developed with septic tanks. And so Mr. England's is just located in that same immediate area. And let me make sure there's nothing else here. Again, so it went to the Utility Commission in the middle part of 2017. It came to, and they recommended approval at that time by a 4-0 vote. And then it went to council in October 2017, and it was denied by, I believe, a 7-0 vote. Mr. England reapplied a couple of months ago, and it went to the June 27th Utility Commission, and they, by 5-0 vote, recommended approval of the variance. Part of their, and I've included their minutes, as well as the council minutes from October 2017. I will say that I believe part of the commission's recommendation, part of their concern for making the recommendation was that they thought that even some development would be beneficial to the city, that there would be construction sales tax and other water revenues that would come in from the development. And they supported the staff recommendation as well. So I know we have Mr. England here. We do have our Public Works Department here if there's any questions of them, but I'll be happy to try and answer any questions myself.
Are there any questions for Mr. Henry?
I have one.
Okay, Counselor.
On that option A where you have a septic tank, but then you pump it to the sewer, do they pay sewer rates when they do that?
Yes,
so it's like
they
a
do.
double whammy. They have to pay to install the septic, and then they pay a monthly sewer rate because they're dumping it into the sewer.
That's correct.
Okay, but you do not recommend that.
Staff would not recommend that based on our research and discussion that we've had with other communities.
What kind of maintenance is involved that that the homeowners didn't take care of, and then the city ended up taking it?
So there was issues with the lines that become fouled up, and typically there's a check valve, which is a one-way valve, so it allows the sewage to flow out and not come back in to the individual homeowner's lot. Those have gotten stuck shut, and therefore when the pump came on, it was unable to pump, and
Okay.
issues with odor. If the pump is not set to pump frequently enough, and the sewage is allowed to sit in the tank too long, it can create odor issues that other neighbors have complained about. Those are the three main ones.
Okay, thank you.
And mainly, the cities or the county had to come in and take over the systems at that point.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have two people signed up to speak on this. Mr. Robert England, would you like to speak to the council?
Robert England, 1601 Quail Ridge Circle, Kingman, Arizona. Mayor and City Council. I would like to attempt to explain the problems I've had in trying to develop the ranches at Aurora Vista. I started the development about 12 years ago, hiring Cliff Smith and Sons, an engineer, to engineer the development. And at the time that there was a new sewer system available, and which was a grinder system. It's not a septic, it's kind of a septic tank, but it's a grinder system, and it pumps into a 2-inch line and goes into the manhole. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I'll try to. I think I tried to read this so you understand. Let's see. We installed a 2-inch forced main system to all lots. I built a home for my daughter using the same system, which fed into a manhole at the end of Aurora Vista, which is what Greg said. We have not had any problems with that line. Mainly, they say, because it's a single line, it goes in, and there's no trouble backfilling. But when you get several of them, I guess they have problems in other cities where they come in with different places and it plugs up those check valves. And so anyway, when we first did this system, there wasn't any cities that had it, and actually, the city thought it was okay, but I think, I don't remember whether Greg was engineer at that time or Pete Johnson was, but the engineering staff has changed, and they did some, let me finish reading this. Let's see. Okay, I have installed already electrical and telephone to each of the lots. And water meters are installed approximately 50% of the lots, because we had a main line go and we only made it run it so far. So we have water meters installed for 5 lots. Let's see. About a year after we completed that work, as you recall, in Kingman there was a little downturn, and so I put the subdivision on hold for a while, and then when I started to apply again, I contacted the engineering department, and they did some investigating, like Greg said, with 2 other cities, and found that they were having problems with that system, so they would not approve the system. So the reason, if I had to probably put it in at the time, it might have been okay, but since they found out a lot of problems had happened, so we just had problems, so I didn't do it. So anyway, so we looked at a lift pump system But the city has had many problems with lift pumps, I guess, and they've taken a lot of lift pumps out in Wallach Ranch and whatnot. And so also the cost of the maintenance and the electrical is far more than the income will ever do to have the lift pump be self-sustaining. So anyway, let's see.
Mr. England?
I got.
Mr. England?
Okay,
Oh,
there are two lots, like Greg said, at the end of the subdivision that could fit and will be fed into that manhole by gravity and in the existing lantern. But, you know, if any of you have had things with development, you have to go to the ADQ, you have to go to engineering. There's a lot of cost involved. For two lots, it wouldn't be economically feasible to do two lots.
Okay, Mr. England, could you kind of wrap it up? The time expired.
Okay. Anyway, that's basically the gist of it. I'm asking you to be thoughtfully consider this proposal because I'm really this is my last effort or just have the property just sit there. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Any questions? No. Okay, thank you so much. The next speaker is Toby Orr.
Toby Orr, 3885 North Christian Court. I just thought I would come and relate the discussions we had at the Municipal Utility Commission, where we agreed unanimously to agree with the city staff in allowing this variance. And the main reason is, now I can't speak for the two lots that you can hook sewer to. Now that could be a different issue. But for the balance of the subdivision, without allowing a lift station, and I can understand why the city does not want to be in the business of maintaining lift stations. That's nasty business. You don't want to do that. But without a lift station, the land becomes virtually useless, and it can never, ever, ever be developed. So if, in fact, you want to encourage growth within the city limits, and there are, reasons to encourage growth, higher tax base, who knows, more sales tax revenues, I can't, speaking for the commission as a whole, we decided that allowing this variance would be a good idea. Also, there's the fear that you would be inundated with requests for variances. We have denied many variances because of the cost or because of rock or because of the distance or the expense. But when there's no other option, period, I'd say let's do it. There's no other option. Either that or just let it sit there forever and never be developed. I think there's another concern on the groundwater and the fact that septic tanks are generally discouraged. But we have a whole state agency to deal with groundwater issues and septic tank issues. And if Mr. England goes through the proper procedures, which he has to do, go through ADEQ for the septic tank approval, and it is approved by ADEQ, there should not be any groundwater issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Orr. I would open the floor for the council discussion.
Mayor, may I?
Yes, please.
I'm probably the first one that would say that I'm not a septic fan, period. But this is a situation where he can't develop that property, period, without. And that's a situation. And I think that we can look at it in this particular instance and say, where some of those areas probably shouldn't have had septics, but they were put in anyway, this is actually, I think, probably one of the more legitimate reasons to have a septic area with septic.
Thank you, Councilor. Yes.
Given that infrastructure investments have already been made on these lots, and that at the time He had approval for this new system, and then things have changed since for reasons out of his control. I think I agree with Councilwoman Nelson that we should go ahead and approve this because there is no other option, and he has made the investments for some of the utilities. So I would recommend moving forward with this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Then I would entertain a motion on agenda item 4A.
I would move that we adopt resolution 4A, resolution number 5231.
I'll second that.
Any discussion, any further discussion? There's been a motion and a second to approve resolution number 5231, and that would approve a sewer variance for Arroyo Ranches. All in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Congratulations. Your persistence paid off. Now we can move to department reports. There are no department reports tonight, so let's move to announcements by mayor, council members, city manager. Limited to announcements, board and commission liaison reports, availability and attendance at conferences and seminars. I'll start with Councilwoman Nelson.
The only thing that I have is that I will not be attending the Arizona Leagues. I apologize. So you guys go and have fun and bring lots of information back for me. That was just found out this week, so I do apologize. I
okay.
will not be able to attend.
Thank you. Nothing? Vice Mayor.
Nothing, thank you.
Councilor Watkins.
Just as always, I just want to just give a thanks to all our commissions and all the people that serve on them. I think we have to continue to always thank them. They need the recognition.
That is fact. Very true. Thank you. Councilor Waite.
I have nothing to add tonight, thank you.
Councilor Scott Staley.
I did attend the airport commission meeting, and Mr. Hayes had touched on it in the work session item about the navigation easements. And this is a pretty technical process that involves the county as well as the city. But I wanted to at least bring this up because what it does is it provides a disclosure to people when they purchase property within the area around the airport to let them know that you're purchasing by an airport. There will be noise, and that way those property owners cannot come back later and sue the city, the owner of the airport, or try to make changes to our airport to make it quieter. So this is something we definitely need to work with staff on to get it approved as quickly as possible before development really starts to happen in that area around the airport so that we can protect our asset. That is all I have.
Attorney Cooper, did you want to add anything? I'm not allowed to. You're not allowed to? Well, then you cannot. Well, I'll just mention that tomorrow morning I'll be welcoming the Mojave La Paz Workforce Investment Board to Kingman. They're meeting here tomorrow morning, and I really look forward to being there and telling them about the wonderful attributes of our city and our workforce efforts. And beyond that, I think that the only other thing I'd like to mention is this afternoon we had a wonderful donation to the city. And Mr. Savage, who has done a lot of carpentry projects for the city and the county and the museums, apparently for a lot of us, donated a beautiful replica of an old Route 66 gas pump. And that you'll be seeing the pictures, I'm sure, but it was really, really a wonderful moment with because he's also he donated two, one for the city to have and one that will be raffled off for our fire department for the old historic fire engine. So it was just a nice moment that, and we really appreciate the efforts he made in bringing that and donating that to the city. That's all I have. And so are there any council requests for future work session agenda items and or calendar adjustments?
Madam Mayor, I would ask two things, both kind of airport economic development related. The first would be, we had our city economic development strategy that was adopted in February of 2019. That had an implementation schedule. I think we owe it to the citizens to keep that as a working document, keep it visible, and to at least bring back a quarterly report on how we're doing, knocking out the tasks in that strategy, to share that with the citizens. I'd like to see that. The other thing I'd like to see, and I don't know exactly how or when, but I know that we're going through this airport master planning process, and I don't know when it would occur in that process, but I think that if we really want to make sure that we start 20 years in the future and kind of work backwards, that there be an opportunity to get everybody around the table, including obviously our staff, the airport planners, FedEx, UPS, Patriot Rail, BNSF, maybe if there's any cargo freight people, maybe somebody from commercial real estate that is familiar with spec shell buildings or flex space for warehousing, logistics, that kind of thing, some freight people, to get all around the table to make sure that we incorporate everything that we need this to be the very best that it can be for the community. I don't know if that's already included, but I think that it'd be great to get all those perspectives around one table and included in that plan. So, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other request for agenda items, calendar adjustments, work session items? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
A second?
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.